welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Now it's good stuff for yours, but hey, it's something. Now, this episode is going to be, I guess, all of my episodes are interesting ones, but this is one that I think will be slightly interesting because I don't know if this is, because technically this is sort of a build-up of a lot of things that have happened over the course of a couple of years, because back when this channel first started, if I made this type of video back when this channel first started, I probably would have had a completely different worldview, but now that a lot of things have happened, things have shifted a bit. But before we get into that, let's go over the smaller channel of the day. The channel in question is Greyecraft. They are Greyecraft on Twitch, but they also post segments on their YouTube channel. As a political streamer, they essentially do the sort of, I hate to use this because I don't know if this is like a thing that they themselves push for, but in a way they kind of do lean into it just because of branding and such. But they definitely do seem to push the Vosh-ish type aesthetic, man with beard and I think man bun, because that's what it looks like on their little icon. As far as I know, they aren't a debate bro, but they do like the reaction segments where they like take a video and then like talk about it, like vids about Rising. They did one about not that long ago, they did one about Fetterman and Oz. Unfortunately, since it's been a hectic week, I haven't had a chance to look at them. I did briefly set aside moments where I was going to look at them, but then I ended up like getting busy with like working on videos and such. So, but I will be checking out the VODs that they post on their YouTube channel, and you should too, because I think them having 20 subs is a little bit too low. They should at least be in like the 100, 200 mark. Their Twitch is doing better. They have 170 followers. Basically, I think that they should have at least that on YouTube. Like, get them to 170 subscribers on YouTube. With that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First, we're going to have to officially update since the last video. Gustavo Petro managed to win in the Colombian presidential election. It was a close race. It was 3 points off, but Petro managed to pull through. He will be the first president of the left in Colombia. There really isn't much I can say except the pink tide is growing. And there was also this one big thing. I guess there's one small thing I should talk about, and it's actually not the Colombian election, but it's a thing that many people have noticed recently, that for some reason, like in this massive wave of pink tide, there's one country that for some reason just skipped out on this new wave of pink tide, and that was Ecuador. For those who don't remember, Ecuador was the country that Rafael Correa used to be the president of before stepping down and giving his position, endorsing Lenin Moreno to be the next president. However, Lenin Moreno ended up turning to a massive shift to the right, and then things were a bit hectic for their next presidential election, and many people were wondering if this nation would be part of the new wave of the pink tide, because, that was like right after Fernandez won, and it was like before the Peruvian election, and like maybe a little after the Bolivian election. I don't remember the exact dates, but like it was around the time where it's like, is the pink tide officially coming back, or were AMLO and Fernandez flukes? And what ended up happening was something that was almost like the Brazilian election. You see, Correa originally intended to run for another term, but due to certain laws, he wasn't allowed to. And then he basically gave his endorsement to someone else in his new party that he made to leave the Moreno, Lenin Moreno, to leave his party in the dust. But while those people were forming a coalition that was the Correist party, there was another left-wing party led by Yaku, and a guy named Yaku. Yaku was an indigenous rights activist who was opposed to Correa because Correa and the guy who was the presidential candidate for Correa, Andrés Áñez, I think. Basically, those two were pushing really hard for oil extradition, drilling for more oil. And since Yaku was an indigenous man, he didn't want them to do that because that would ruin the environment and ruin some indigenous people's land. Yaku had even endorsed against Lenin Moreno in the previous election and endorsed the conservative who ended up becoming president in that cycle, in the cycle where he ran, Guillermo Lasso. But in the election that he ran against Correa's party was, like, he just didn't endorse anybody in the second round. But a lot of Yaku's constituencies ended up going to Lasso. So basically a lot of things just happened that weren't really necessarily looking too good for him. But if you think that's it for the pink tide, remember, we still got one more country left this year that could potentially be everybody said, like, this always happens. Every election is the most important election ever. And that's kind of the truth. Every election is the most important election in our lifetime. And for the pink tide, that is very much the case. Everybody was thinking, like, is this the true test of the pink tide? Is this the true test of the pink tide? Is this the true test of the pink tide? And by some people, I mean me. I literally say, like, this could be the test for the pink tide. AMLO's election was technically a test of the pink tide. He won a country that never really shifted left ever since Cardenas. But Bolivia was also a test because it's like, they just got couped. Is Massa's political power still relevant enough in the country that they can still push through? Chile was literally going to change its entire political system to get rid of the fascist constitution. That was definitely a big test as well. But this one is also a test. And of course it means we gotta see if Lula still has relevancy. And it will be the last election that I talk about this year that isn't America's. But I don't know if it will be the only remaining election that I talk about this year. You see, because something interesting happened that threw everybody in for a loop. It turns out that Israel is poised to potentially go to a 5th election in 3 years as the massive coalition that was very shaky from the start has officially announced that they really can't move forward, so they're going to dissolve parliament. Technically, it hasn't happened yet. They've pushed forth the idea of dissolving parliament, but it hasn't been voted on yet. If it does get voted on, there will be another election in Israel. And depending on if that happens, and another thing, will determine on whether or not I actually talk about it. Because I'm going to put it to a vote. That's right. If you go on my YouTube channel, you'll see that there's a new community post. And that community post says, if Israel holds an election this year, do you want me to talk about it? And depending on how the vote goes by the end of the week that this video comes up, well, I'll talk about it or not. I just want to let everybody know ahead of time, this isn't going to be one of those ones that's like very interesting just because that there is something interesting going to happen. It's only interesting because of it itself. Like, it is an election going on in Israel that is the 5th one in like 3 years. And just the interesting politicalness of like Israel's political system. Speaking of elections, the next election that was very important that just happened was the French election. And oh boy, it was actually not that bad. For those who don't remember what happened, you see, after the immense failure that the French left decided to do with the presidential election, they decided to get their shit together and decide, hey, we're actually going to form a coalition. That coalition being NUPES, and it was set to go against the Republican coalition, the UDC, Macron's coalition Ensemble, the National Rallies coalition, and Reconquest and its coalition. And while not all the results have been verified, especially with other like constituencies, like there are some constituencies like in French Guyana that I think if I remember correctly, it's like French Guyana doesn't have political parties, but they instead have political coalitions, and those coalitions might decide whether or not they're part of like the mainstream French coalition, or they might be seated as independents. But the results, as far as it's been projected, show Macron's coalition getting 245 seats, and Jean-Luc Mélenchon's coalition getting 131. While yes, it's a hefty number apart, but Jean-Luc Mélenchon's coalition is the biggest coalition aside from Macron's. In fact, in the first round of voting, the coalitions were, like the results of the coalitions were Macron's coalition with 25.8% of the vote and Mélenchon's coalition with 25.7% of the vote. And it was only after a second round, where basically a lot of the other people in contention were eliminated, that things went differently. And that's because, like, in each coalition, it's sort of like first past the post individually, but then it's, of course, united together as one. But this is a very good showing, and does raise one question. Why didn't the French left just coalesce to begin with, even though, like, this is one thing that bothers me so much. It was literally the day after the presidential election that all of these big left-wing members of the French electorate, like the PS's old presidential candidates, saying, like, why didn't you just coalesce around Mélenchon? And Christina Taubira going, like, why didn't you just coalesce under Mélenchon? It's like, why didn't you guys do that beforehand? Why didn't you say all this during the lead-up of the election? Mélenchon was so close to getting to the runoff. But anyways, that's enough of that. Let's go to the United States of America, where things really matter. First, we're going to talk about this story. It was a very interesting thing that came out of Alaska. And yeah, that's something that happened. Remember Alaska, where they did this big thing where it's like, in the first round, you get 4 people, and then in the last round, like, there's like a second round with ranked choice voting, and it's like this really big thing that everybody has been looking forward to in Alaska. And with the sad passing of Representative Don Young, they will be able to move forward with this idea. And many people were looking forward to this idea so much that a lot of people online actually threw their support behind Santa Claus. Yeah, well, and remember how the results went down, right? Sarah Palin won, Nick Begich got second, Al Gross got third, and Mary Sattler Peltola got fourth, thereby making those 4 the ones that would move forward in the next round. However, almost immediately after out of the blue, Al Gross announced that he would be withdrawing from the election and gave his support to Mary Sattler Peltola and the 5th place finisher, Tara Sweeney, because here's the thing. In the laws of Alaska, the laws were that if he had withdrawn from a certain point, then the 5th place finisher would be bumped up to, like, be part of the 4-person second round. However, Gross apparently withdrew too late for that to be a thing. So now it will just be Palin, Begich, and Peltola. And everybody is so confused why Gross decided to drop out. It's just so perplexing that literally I have nothing to say. Many people were even saying, like, it's mad because Santa Claus was in 5th place for a while, and, like, he was originally in 4th place in a while, and then he was in 5th place for a while, and then he became in 6th place. And if scenarios changed, then hypothetically Santa Claus could have made it to the 4th round. Like, he could have made it to the final 4. But I guess things didn't turn out that way. Speaking of things that didn't turn out the way you want, the Uvalde shooting, remember that? Yeah, well, the Uvalde police officers and Uvalde city members are still basically trying to make sure that things look as incredibly shady as they can. Like, think about it. Remember, like, immediately after the shooting, the police officers had to come out and say, like, no children were shot by the police. And it's like, wait, we didn't think that. What do you mean? Why are you coming out with a statement? It's literally like in a cartoon when a person, like, is trying to, like, hide the fact that they did something so bad that they immediately go, like, I didn't do the thing. And it's like, nobody thought you did the thing, and now we're incredibly suspicious. Well, the mayor states there is no cover-up to the shooting, and he's stating this because apparently, according to some people, he's stating that some people are telling him to not release any records relating to the district attorney's investigation, including the fact that they will not be releasing the body cam footage from the incident. And things are getting more crazy, as it turns out. Apparently, a police officer, his wife was being murdered, and he tried to go in to save her, and the police, like, arrested him instead of going after the gunman. And it's like, this is, like, a thing. Like, this is like, the thing about it is like, many people are saying, like, oh, this is because of the, like, there are some people who are trying to make the argument that the reason why the police didn't do anything further is because of, like, the big defund the police movement. But it's like, this isn't the case. This has happened before. This has happened so many times. Like, one of the most prominent things was, like, I forget, it's the documentary. It's something called 77 Minutes. Or, like, 66 minutes. Or 55 minutes. Something like that. It's a dual number. It's like, basically, it was like a shooting at a McDonald's, and the shooting, like, there was a shooting at a McDonald's, and, like, the police officers basically surrounded the building, and they had multiple, like, the snipers confirmed, they had multiple angles to stop him, but nobody did anything, and that guy just basically just massacred a ton of people, and the police didn't do anything. Even as I'm looking into it right now, I'm starting to see that there are a lot more shady things that are obviously going down. Like, the fact of the matter is, like, these police are either incompetent, which is very likely, or they're malicious. And unfortunately, you can't just say, oh, they did the right thing. They didn't do the right thing. They didn't do the right thing. It's obvious that they didn't do the right thing. Because they were in the building. Like, this is one thing I didn't know. They were inside the building. They were, like, right outside of the room where this was happening. And apparently, they didn't even have a radio when they were inside the building. Like, the people who are pushing for the defund the police narrative more than anybody are the police. They're making it pretty clear that all this money is being wasted. Like, police officers are overpaid. The police are overly militarized. If they're being overly militarized, do something. They're not even doing anything. And I'm sick of the BS excuses that the police always make these same excuses, like, oh, we were following protocol. It's like, no, you're not following protocol. Oh, you're scared for our lives. Then why'd you sign up to be a freaking cop? Protect and serve. Like, this is stupid. Like, your job is to protect and serve. You're supposed to be the ones, like, and the police, it's like, but what if, and I don't, like, and here's the thing, if you're going to go in the comment section, or I guarantee you not, because, like, a conservative probably wouldn't give a shit about that, but, like, they wouldn't, like, if you're going to go in the comment section and be like, but what about the police's kids? I don't care. The police signed up for the job. He knew what he was doing. I would rather have that police officer be dead than the freaking children in a school. And the thing is, you know who had more guts than the police officers in that situation? The freaking parents. There were parents that were running in there and getting their kids. They knew they probably were like, these are just normal parents that decided, screw it. If, I don't know, like, maybe I'll distract the guy for like 2 seconds or something. I don't know. Maybe I will be able to get my kids out of there or something. I don't know. And another thing, I just remembered, like, where the police said, like, oh, we were waiting for Border Patrol, but it's like Border Patrol showed up, like, immediately. The fact that they have to keep covering up and keep, like, saying everything in their power to try and make you think this isn't a big deal. It's very obvious this is a big deal. And the fact that nobody is doing anything about this is insane. Like, the fact that the mayor is literally just, like, sitting there going, like, oh, well, we can't show the footage. It's like, this is what I'd do if I was the mayor. And I know this is, like, LARPy, but, like, bear with me. If I was the mayor, I'd literally be like, if the cops are like, we don't want to show the footage, it's like, fired, out. Like, no, after this situation, they should have been, like, fired out. Like, for real, it's just, like, there's no point. Like, there's no point if the police are going to not do anything, then what is the point of having them? But anyways, let's move on to the last story. This is like, ironically, I saved this one for the last because this is the biggest thing that just happened, like the most recent thing that just happened, and obviously like the biggest thing that just happened. But I mean, there really isn't much else I can say because I'm pretty sure I said all the things that happened when the original draft opinion was leaked, and that's, of course, Roe v. Wade is officially overturned. And to be honest, it is kind of just like one of the big things that I'm sort of tired of seeing, because everybody wants to put the blame on somebody. Oh, you voted for Jill Stein, you're bad. Oh, you criticized Hillary Clinton, you're bad. Oh, you, like, and then people want to blame the Democrats, which, to be fair, that is probably more, that is credible. The latter of the two criticisms is at least credible, because it's like, oh, everybody's like, oh, Obama had super majorities. Why didn't he codify Roe v. Wade? And they're like, oh, but he only had it for like 7 months until Ted Kennedy died. And it's like, yeah, then why didn't he do it in that 7 months? But it's like, of course he didn't do it in 7 months. There was like a massive amount of pro-life Democrats. Like, there are a vast majority of pro-life Democrats. Meanwhile, here are how many pro-life Democrats we have in the House and Senate right now. Essentially 2, maybe 3. It's Henry Cuellar, Joe Manchin, and to a degree, Bob Casey. That's it. But to be fair, Bob Casey did reconsider. He did vote to officially codify Roe v. Wade. I think, wasn't that the vote I think that was the vote, where they, like, Democrats tried to vote to codify Roe v. Wade. But the thing is, like, this was a thing that was seen like 20 million miles away, but then everybody wants to act like surprised that it happened. Like, especially, nice cinema, Suzanne Collins and Joe Manchin, they really, for some reason, are trying to pretend like this isn't obviously what they were doing from day one. Like, what? But Gorsuch and Kavanaugh said that they told us in private meetings that they wouldn't take away Roe v. Wade. It's like, what did you think? Every conservative justice wants to get rid of Roe v. Wade. That's literally been the conservatives' plan since 1973. And conservatives, like, this is the thing. You have to give conservatives a round of angry applause, because they have been planning this for years. They have been slowly building to this decision for years. They've put in work. Like, many conservatives literally point blank say that they knew that it wasn't going to happen when they were alive, but it was going to happen when their grandkids were alive. And if they did, and if they eventually stopped it at one point, then the whole plan paid off. Conservatives sucked it up and voted for the Republicans that weren't 100% pro-life until they were able to get primary challenges to get rid of them and shift the whole party further to the right. This was a game plan. This was a huge plan in the making. And it seemed like Democrats and people who were pro-abortion never necessarily figured out a plan to counteract anything. Basically, their plan was just to hopefully kick this down the road and hope that the crazy pro-birthers weren't able to push it far enough. I mean, if I remember correctly, there was another abortion case that was codified Roe v. Wade again, but like, it was basically like, it just added like a slightly less, it made it like changed the things ever so slightly to the right, because Roe v. Wade was like, abortion should be a thing, but then the second one was like, a life begins at a certain point. But this one, of course, is like basically saying like, yeah, this isn't a thing anymore. But it's like, oh, so far it's only on a national level, but it's like individual states can decide like what the abortion laws are. And depending on how red the state is, there are already laws being pushed. Like Missouri, almost immediately after Roe v. Wade was overturned, they passed a law basically saying like, nope, no more abortions, thank you. And if I remember correctly, that's the state with like one abortion clinic, so it's like, really they just had to close down one place. But again, like, there's been some criticisms levied at the Democrats that are fair. Like, again, for the most part, a lot of them refuse to codify Roe v. Wade at any point, like not making an official like law on it, or like, especially in the recent years, because like, people are like, it's been months since this thing was leaked, so like, and people are saying like Democrats haven't done much. And it's like, well, technically they did do that thing where they tried to, but then Manchin for some reason voted against it. I say for some reason, even though it's pretty obvious why, because he's anti-abortion. Look at me, it's weird, because I remember, like, Bob Casey was one of, like, he was a quintessential, like, he was born and raised as, like, an anti-abortion Democrat, but then he voted for, like, the thing to codify Roe v. Wade. But that is one thing you have to just levy at, like, people who are, like left of center. It's like, oh, yeah, they basically just thought that this was going to be the law forever. They thought that they could just rely on precedent. But the thing is, like, that's not how it works. Yeah, sure, conservatives love to, like, say, like, oh, we love, like, historical precedent and such, and they will do things for, like, actual government things, but it's like, a Supreme Court decision is different. Precedents of Supreme Court decisions have been changed previously. There were Supreme Court decisions that basically made it okay for black people to be treated as second-class citizens. That's not a thing anymore. You actually have to do more than just rely on a just decades-old Supreme Court decision for your decisions. But yeah, there really isn't much else I could say except like protest or do anything, call your representatives if they're not in favor of like a statewide abortion legislation, protest at the SCOTUS members' houses. Like literally, there's not much else you can do. Like call your Democratic members of Congress or senators and see if they can push for a different thing to codify Roe v. Wade into law, or like something that at least guarantees some abortion rights. Because like again, the conservatives were able to like push for years. Like it was the thing. Like yes, Roe v. Wade said that you could have an abortion, but that doesn't mean like they had to guarantee that it was easy to get one. Missouri had like literally one abortion clinic. Clearly, things weren't exactly 100% as they seemed. Just because you have access to something doesn't mean that you will be able to get it. But anyways, with that out of the way, let's move on to the main topic of this video. We're going to be talking about my problems with the Green Party. And for those who don't remember, the point of this series is to take a group that is relatively positive in my viewpoint and then give my criticisms of them. And it seemed that a lot of the people in my audience really wanted to see me talk about the Green Party, because I think at this point my audience has a very interesting viewpoint on the Green Party. You see, I know for a fact that at least early on, I'm pretty sure a lot more people who were subbed to me would probably have a more positive view of the Green Party. But now it seems that maybe the majority of my audience might have a more negative view of the Greens. I know for a fact there are a lot of people who I follow and are mutuals with on Twitter that probably have a not so positive viewpoint of the Greens nowadays, or even ever, which we'll get into when I talk about it. Now here's the thing, I actually technically have made a video on the Green Party before, but it was one of my party history videos. It's outdated because it only goes up to the 2016 election and a little bit afterwards. It doesn't cover the greatness that was the 2020 cycle. But for a brief summary, the Green Party of the United States is a political party that has existed in some capacity since the mid-80s, formed to translate the growing environmentalist movement into a political party. It was a part of a green bloom around the world as the environment became a more pressing issue to the people around the world. It was a slow burn. You see, originally, in the 50s, nobody really gave a shit about the environment, but then in the early 60s, you saw the rise of the hippie movement, and part of it was of course, environmental consciousness, but they were more focused on issues like Vietnam and race issues until the 80s, when they officially were, when those issues were officially quote-unquote solved. And now the hippies who were there were now grown up and getting into actual real jobs, and they were able to push these issues in different ways. Some of them were in academics now. They're pushing for the ecology movement within academics. Maybe they were getting elected to political office and were raising these issues to people, or maybe they continued being activists. But essentially, the official beginning of the Green Movement was in the 80s, and there were some people who felt that it wasn't necessarily the best interest to go into one of the major two parties, and instead try to form political groups outside of the two-party system. But there was a really decentralized political movement, despite the fact that there were a lot of people who were trying to make it centralized, such as Howie Hawkins. Basically what would happen is individual, states would form little green parties, and it essentially just kept moving, state to state. Each would get, one individual green party set up. And it wasn't until 1996 that they had enough viable political parties across the entire United States that were eventually able to test the waters with a decentralized presidential campaign of Ralph Nader, and that eventually coalesced into an actual nationwide party that would run him again as their candidate in the 2000 presidential election. A campaign that was run so well that Democrats decided to point the finger at them and say, hey, you are not the reason why we lost this election cycle. You played spoiler in Florida, because Florida was a swing state and had flipped from Gore to Bush, very often in the night, and Ralph Nader was the third-party candidate that polled the best of all of them, even beating the already viable third-party force in America, the Reform Party. Now, there have been a ton of videos that have done everything they could to try and save Ralph Nader's name. Mr. Beat did one, I did one debunking the spoiler myth altogether. But essentially, one of the big things that defines, the spoiler effect, they are obviously not a spoiler, is the fact that there were more Democrats, like there were more openly defined Democrats that voted for Bush than voted for Nader. So literally, if you want to blame someone for stealing votes away from Gore, you should probably look at George Bush. And apparently, I think, if I remember correctly, there were some people who I think were like crossing doors from like Democrats down the ballot to like Buchanan, but also like that the butterfly ballot that was used that election cycle was very confusing. You see, many people actually voted for both Al Gore and the Socialist Party nominee David McReynolds, believing that McReynolds was part of a secondary race. Like he was they believe that he wasn't a presidential candidate. Another thing was like the way that a butterfly ballot worked was that you had to punch a hole in the ballot, and many people were wondering like when you punched a hole, it wasn't like 100%. Like it wasn't like you punched the hole and there's an obvious hole on who goes where. You would punch a hole, but then like sometimes the paper would still be stuck on the back of like the whole sheet. So then people were thinking like, does this count? Like basically the whole thing was just a crapshoot. But ever since then, the Green Party has sort of become America's fourth party. Like you have the Democrats and the Republicans, obviously. The Libertarians usually get that consistent third, and the Greens usually got a either not so distant or somewhat distant fourth. Though, of course, not for the next two cycles because Ralph Nader was still running, but he was running as independent candidate. But party-wise, they were still big. And the Green Party essentially became the party for people who are too far mainstream to vote for the Democrats, but also want to still kind of be mainstream. Like, I mean, you could be a socialist in America, and you would probably have voted at that point. Up to that point, you probably would have voted for like the Socialist Party, or like if you're a communist, you would have probably supported like one of the other like smaller like parties, like the Workers' World Party. Or if you were in like the cult, you would support like the what's the cult party's name? The Socialist Equality Party. But like basically, the Greens were a mixed coalition of socialists who wanted to still be mainstream, or social democrats that seemed too far to the left for the Democrats, and or anybody who really cared about the environment. Also, black liberation activists, activists of like other minority groups like LGBTQ activists or disability rights advocates, gay rights advocates, I think I already said that, or women's advocates. You know, like basically, if you were a minority group, you would probably have at one point gone through a Green Party phase. College students who wanted to rebel against their Democratic parents, hippies from the 60s who refused to try to become mainstream. Basically, they became the default political party for the anti-Democrat left. But they were still having a lot of trouble trying to enter as a somewhat big political force. Even in 2012, they had a route to potentially go that way, because for some reason Roseanne Barr wanted to be their presidential nominee, but then, sure enough, she didn't become their nominee, and instead they endorsed Jill Stein. But then in 2016, the Greens got a massive bump in support that they hadn't seen since basically their first election cycle, being a 100% true to blue, well, true to green political party. 2016, of course, was the big, like, Bernie Sanders was a socialist and basically pushed socialism into the mainstream political discourse. And with Bernie's presidential run, basically that same coalition that was in the Green Party, basically a separate but almost identical coalition formed within the Bernie campaign. So much so that when the Bernie campaign sadly got rigged, Greens were right there to try and pick up the slacks. Jill Stein was smart. She decided to attend the Democratic Party National Convention. She was smart and tried to get Nina Turner to be her running mate. She actively sought to try and translate the Bernie Sanders movement into the Green Party. She even at one point offered, at the very least, like near the end of the campaign, I don't know if Bernie had dropped out yet, but she even offered the chance of Bernie to be on the ticket, either as the presidential candidate or her VP. Her saying, like, it's time to form this new political movement. News sources that were basically seen as Green Party leaning became heavily prominent because, again, association with like progressive Bernie movements, you know, like Democracy Now!, they would host prominent debates with like people who were like Bernie to Clinton and people who were Bernie to Stein, well, not even Bernie to Stein, I don't think Chris Hedges was pro-Bernie, basically saying, like, should we go the route of trying to take over the Democratic Party, or should we try to build up the Green Party? And essentially, immediately afterwards, 3 factions in the left sort of formed. The faction that was like, let's go into the Democrats, the faction that said, let's build up the Greens, and the faction that said, let's build a new party from the get-go. And this is where the problems start truly beginning. You see, of these 3 groups, the one group that seemed to work the least hard were the Bernie to Green people, which included people who were already in the Green Party, who were trying to get Bernie Sanders people to go in the Green Party, and people who are from the Bernie movement to, like, going into the Green Party, like Kenneth Mejia. A lot of Greens, I guess, just expected for the floodgates to form within the Greens. Like, they just expected the people from the Bernie camp to immediately go to the Greens, because it's like, oh yeah, a bunch of you voted for us in 2016, so I guess you're immediately going to continue backing us for down the ballot races, right? And it's like, which they unfortunately got a sad truth, because the thing is, Bernie was pushing really hard for his supporters to try and take over the Democratic Party, and many of them, many prominent people who were even Bernie to Stein, very openly stated, yeah, this is the best move, like Kyle Kulinski, who helped form Justice Democrats. DSA basically saying, like, yeah, we should, basically they remaining, like, undecided as a big, like, nonpartisan group, but essentially endorsing people in the Democratic primaries as well. They had backed Greens before, and they basically, like, during presidential elections, they gave members, like, basically, like, you vote Green if you want, we don't really care. But the thing is, the Greens were not really doing anything to facilitate the Green Enter. I was doing more work to try and facilitate the Green Enter, and I didn't even believe 100% in the Green Enter. I basically said, like, the Green Party, their infrastructure is right there, ergo, it's probably best for us to try and, like, push for the Greens to be, like, the viable third-party Green force, like, progressive force. But the thing is, no one else really saw it that way. They either fully in on, like, the Justice Democrat strategy, or they were fully into Movement for a People's Party. And unfortunately, I was agnostic on the Green Party issue, so I was essentially agnostic on the other ones as well. I basically allowed each of the strategy to yield the results. And by the end of 2018, it was pretty clear which decisions were more viable. Justice Democrats was able to get a lot of people elected to Congress. They were able to get AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley, and we were able to get a couple more progressive Democrats as well, who were not necessarily Justice Democrats. The Greens were close to getting somebody in, and Movement for People's Party was doing nothing. It was essentially pretty clear by that point what strategy was yielding its best results. And after that, most people essentially gravitated towards the Justice Democrat strategy, with Greens being a close, hey, if things don't work out, we'll be there. And 2020 was the next election cycle where we were supposed to see whether or not that played out. We had Bernie running in the Democratic primary. We had some down-the-ballot candidates. And Greens were there. What will happen? Well, Bernie gets close, but COVID happens, puts everything into a shit show, Bernie drops out, and the Green Party presidential primaries are such a shit show that they could deserve an entire video with no news stories to talk about it. But to sum it up very briefly, it is a race that had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 major people run, and of all of them, I can only come out saying that 3 of them have no blood on their hands for anything. Meanwhile, it was the same cycle that had, like, I mean, and even, like, one of the ones that has quote-unquote blood on their hands isn't necessarily that bad. We had, like, a person who simps for Russia. We have someone who's anti-vax. We have someone who's a crazy homophobe and sexist. We have somebody who's an anti-Semite. We have somebody who is a Republican. And we have someone else who was all of the things that I have just said. And that last one wasn't even running to get himself as the nominee. He was running for somebody else because he had nothing. Okay, let me actually try to briefly sum up the 2020 Green Party primaries. And this is, again, very brief summary because I still have a lot of things to get to. Okay, so The Green Party desperately wants one of their leading members, Howie Hawkins, to run for president. Okay? So Howie decides that he's going to form an exploratory committee. A lot of prominent Greens decide to get involved in the Howie Hawkins campaign, basically pushing a lot of other prominent Greens to endorse and push for Howie Hawkins to be the nominee. The problem is, a lot of these guys use their positions in power to try and push this as well. One of them, Andrea Merida Cuellar, literally said that she would go to Green Party events drumming up support for Howie while still in her position as vice chair of the party. Meanwhile, there were some other people who were already running for the presidency of the Green Party, like Senator M. Curry and Ian Schlockman, who were a bit mad that even though they were prominent people within the Green Party, one of them being a former gubernatorial candidate, Ian, and one being a former presidential candidate, Senator, and also some other people like Dario Hunter, who was a current elected official at the time of his entering the Green Party primary. Even though those people were very prominent within the Green Party, or in general, they weren't getting any coverage by the Green Party, and they all penned a letter saying, hey, this is weird. And this got even more hectic when a person affiliated with the Howie Hawkins campaign, Kevin Zeese, decided to write an email to Ian, basically begging him to drop out of the race in order to endorse Howie Hawkins, because he believed that Ian did have a shot at winning the presidency, and that the only reason he was doing it was because Ian really wanted to run for president, and that he would ruin his chances with a future within the Green Party because he's doing this. Ian then posted that letter, and then I posted that letter to the Independent Political Report because Kevin Zeese was also a writer for the Independent Political Report, and I decided to get involved within the Green Party drama. Meanwhile, before the Greens even considered having Howie Hawkins as their nominee, there were some members of the Green Party who were interested in having Jesse Ventura seek their nomination, and asked Jesse if he would appear at the Green Party National Convention at the time to basically push for the idea of maybe running for president. However, Jesse Ventura didn't end up showing up to the Green Party National Convention, and made no effort to actually seek the Green Party nomination. However, despite this, there was a person who was running for the Green Party nomination named Chad Wilson, who was running for president solely with the intention of dropping out and giving his nomination to Jesse Ventura, because he believed that Jesse Ventura would be the only person who could get the Green Party into national attention. And one of the prominent ways that he did this was basically lie about the process of the Green Party getting the nomination, lie about how Howie Hawkins was running his campaign, lie about what rules Howie Hawkins was breaking, and lie about the fact that Jesse Ventura was running for president. Basically, many times we got into arguments, where he would just say that Jesse Ventura was running for president. I would say he is not. He stated point blank that he is not, but then he would link a Primo Nutmeg interview where Jesse Ventura basically said, there are some people who want to write my name in, I'm not going to stop them. Ventura continually giving this contradictory information, one day saying, do not endorse any of these people who are forcing me to run for president. I am not running for president. I am point blank never stating that I'm running for president. But then in another interview saying, hey, if people are running for me, I'm not going to stop them, blah, blah, blah. And his intentions weren't made very clear until an interview with Primo Nutmeg was released, where Ventura point blank states that he does not want to seek the Green Party nomination. He doesn't want to put in any work to get the Green Party nomination. He instead just wanted to be given it. And Chad Wilson claimed that due to Howie Hawkins breaking certain rules, one of the rules that he claimed to break was that Howie Hawkins was also seeking the nominations of other political parties and was members of other political parties due to his affiliation with the Socialist Party, ignoring the fact that the Socialist Party doesn't exist in New York, therefore does not count as a political party. And him being a member of the Socialist Party would basically be the equivalent of being a member of DSA. That wouldn't disqualify you from running for another party's nomination. At least not formally. Chad Wilson continued to push lies about Jesse Ventura's intentions, even point blank saying that when the convention happens, they would be able to push for a massive amount of the delegates to vote for Jesse Ventura instead of Howie Hawkins, because Howie Hawkins broke Green Party rules, despite the fact that I just stated that he didn't break those rules. I was then accused of being a Howie Hawkins shield, despite the fact that I was not endorsing any candidate in the election, in fact making it very abundantly clear that I didn't care who won the Green Party nomination, as long as it wasn't the openly anti-Semitic David Rold, which Chad Wilson and his associates said that they would rather take instead of Howie. They continued to push lies about Jesse Ventura running for president, even when Jesse Ventura said on his Twitter account that he was not running for president and do not support any people who are backing any intention to draft him for the nomination, as he doesn't want to seek the presidency. Chad seemed to ignore the fact that the reason why there was a primary process was because the primaries were binding, meaning that the states who voted for certain people had to vote for the certain people when it came time for the convention, and there wasn't any way for them to vote for Jesse Ventura. Chad actually hedging his bets that they would, despite the fact that they didn't. And then, when it didn't work, he actually decided to push for a write-in Jesse Ventura in the general election movement, claiming that Jesse Ventura, under the Alaskan Green Party nomination and various write-in bids, will get more votes than Howie Hawkins, which didn't end up happening either. Chen then decided to try and turn his weird coalition of Jesse Ventura supporters into a viable political party, which isn't working either. That entire debacle basically kind of made the Green Party look like a lot of people made that joke of like Green Party being like this decentralized focus, like this decentralized group of random online people, and sure enough, this election cycle didn't really change that. In fact, it probably strengthened that, given what happened with this 2020 cycle. I think to a degree this can kind of lead into a issue that I have with the Greens, and this is their issue with vetting people. You see, with this cycle, they let a lot of people within the Green Party, and again, they didn't really do that much vetting. Chad Wilson had literally no affiliation with the Green Party whatsoever previous to that cycle, but they let him in, and sure enough, that's what ended up happening. Dario Hunter, they just let him in because he was a Democrat. He was an elected official. That's the only reason why they let him in. And basically, like how the Libertarians will basically take any Republican backwash, the Greens will take some Democratic backwash as well. There's another more prominent example of Democratic Party backwash, but we'll have to save them for the last bit. First, we're going to talk about another Democrat that basically tried to enter the Green Party and, didn't really do so hot. That person is Tamara Zwinak. They were a Joe Biden supporter, a very open Joe Biden supporter, who was running as the Green Party candidate in North Carolina District 11. Now, the thing is, that notion was very confusing to me. Like, she was a Joe Biden supporter who was a member of the Green Party who was running as a Green Party candidate in North Carolina District 11. That was the district that Madison Cawthorn was in, which was a very close seat. And that made me question it even more so. Like, why is she running? Like, why isn't she should be in the Democratic primary? Because this wasn't even the primaries weren't even done yet. Like, why didn't she run in the primary at all? So I got into exchange with her on Twitter, and this exchange is very perplexing to me. Well, it's not perplexing if you actually think about it objectively, but listen to it. I DM her, I'm curious if you are a Biden supporter, why are you running as Green? And what are the differences between you and Democratic nominee Mo Davis? So I think it was right after the primaries had finished. She responded, I support the best candidate to beat Trump. Read my tweets and blog. Read my opponent. Most supported torture, and now he wants to walk back on those human rights violations. I say, then what then leads you to the Green Party rather than run against him in the primary? She says, I'm running for Congress. I did not have a Green opponent in the primary. Therefore, I qualified automatically for the general election. That didn't answer my question. I said, yes, but if you are an adherent Biden supporter, why run as a Green? She responded, you're mixing apples with oranges. Trump must be defeated. He's a proto-fascist. This is the thing. This is the thing that truly made me perplexed. If she just said, I'm a Green, but I want to vote for the person who will defeat Trump, it's that's one thing. But then she says this next. I am not a Green Party member. I am a Green. There is a difference. Read my platform, read my tweets. I respond to that very strange question. She said point blank, she's not a Green. And I said, then why run as a Green if you are not a member of a party? She says, okay, I really appreciate your curiosity. Perhaps you could benefit from a course in political science or read up on party politics, structure, voter registration, etc. I am not one person to give this education. I am a candidate. And I thought that was incredibly stupid and condescending because I was a poli-sci student at the time. I graduated from my poli-sci course, and it's literally just some old woman thinking that she can lecture me or something. I responded, I am literally just asking, why are you running for a party you are not a member of and have no intention of supporting come November? She responds, these are all her responses that are, again, really incredibly stupid. Read up on the history of the Green Party in the United States. I was also a candidate in the 90s when there was not membership of the party. It was getting organized. I am a Green. It may help you to learn about the Green movement. It is diverse. People can run as Democrats or Republicans and not be a member of the party. A lot of candidates are not members of the political party. Political parties are organizations. If you register to vote, why don't you join a party? You don't have to join a party, right? Why not? When you register to vote, you can register as a Democrat without having to join the Democratic Party. Every party has a political structure, but you don't have to be a member of that organization. Do voters have to explain why they don't join the Democratic Party? No, it's not required. This is so stupid. She's running as the Green Party nominee, and for some reason she wants to randomly go rambling on about a history. And this is the thing, like, she's like, read up on the history of the Green Party. It's like, bitch, I made a history of the Green Party video. And at one point she's literally like, says, like, people can run as Democrats or Republicans and not be a member of the party. It's like, yeah, you are. If you're a member, if you're running with a party, you're a member of the party. And that's the thing. She's the one who made the distinction. She says she's not a Green Party member. She's a Green. And it's like, this makes no sense. Like, this literally made absolutely no sense. And I told her point blank, okay, but you're still ignoring the question. I don't need you to explain to me any of this. You have no interest in supporting Greens come November, and you so far haven't really said anything profound enough to warrant not needing to be a Dem, so run as Green. She said, no, I am not ignoring it. I don't have to join the party. She's like, you don't have to join the party. I don't have to explain why I don't buy apples when I went to the store. And I responded point blank, I asked, why are you running as Green? You proceed to go on and ramble about voter registration. And then she said, I guess I could say a DM does not make a campaign. I don't do sound bites. My platform and Twitter account explain my position. If you want to take the time to learn about me, thanks for reaching out. She then blocked me, but then, immediately afterwards, my Twitter account was briefly suspended. And I mean, there was literally nothing else to say except point blank, it's very obvious that she didn't like what I said and tried to get me suspended from Twitter. And the thing is, the North Carolina Green Party even got involved. They contacted me and said that they point blank just said, yeah, the Greens are not backing her. They're not backing her. We don't know who this woman is. I don't know. She just showed up one day, but that's like so weird. It's like that interaction just makes no sense. Like, it was clear that she was just dodging the question. Like, I publicly just said, like, if you're a Biden supporter, there's essentially nothing of your platform that indicates any, like, major difference with the Democrats. Why don't you just run as a Democrat? And instead of just saying, she could have literally just said, I didn't want to run as a Democrat, I wanted to run as a Green. And it's like, okay, fair enough. Whatever. Like, that would have been a lame answer, but it's like, that's an answer. But she rambled on, like, for a million years about voter registration and wanted to give me, like, a 5 million year lecture about the history of the Green Party. I was like, I literally made a video talking about the history of the Green Party. But anyways, that's not really the major focus of, like, the people who join Greens. Like, yeah, some people who are Democrats do end up joining the Greens, but there's also one of the biggest issues that many people say is, like, the Greens seem to, like, I mean, a lot of people try to pin this, like, the Greens are essentially just Republican AstroTurf. While that's not technically true, Greens do have a problem with that. And it's very sad that that's a thing that they have a problem with. Okay, so first, one that was brought to my attention was Paul Knupp in Iowa District 3. He ran in Iowa District 3 in 2018 as a Green. And then literally the next cycle, he ran as a pro-life Republican. Then in 2020, there were two people who were former Greens, Susan Lochitsky and Ibra Tahir, who were both, like, Greens and part of this, like, big, like, Chad Wilson-esque movement of, like, people who were, like, anti-Howie Hawkins. And both of them are just Republicans now. They're just point-blank Republicans now. Ibra Tahir, he's literally just a normal-ass Republican now. There was literally, like, it wasn't even like we're a Robert M. LaFollette type of Republican. It's like, no. They were just point-blank Republicans. However, one of the most notable ones recently was the instance with the Montana Green Party. For those who don't remember, in 2020, the Montana Green Party made a stunning decision to announce that they wouldn't back any candidates come November. Like, they wouldn't run Howie on the presidential ticket. They wouldn't run a Senate candidate. They wouldn't run a gubernatorial candidate. They wouldn't run a lieutenant gubernatorial candidate. They wouldn't run a House candidate. They wouldn't run any candidate, like Secretary of State. Nothing. They would run nobody because every race in that area was considered purple, and they didn't want to muddy the waters. I guess they were like basically the safe staters in the 2000, like right after the 2000 election. I forgot to mention, like, there was like a brief divide within the Green Party, but like the safe staters versus the like Naderites. But basically, they were just, I guess these guys were just a bunch of the safe staters. However, almost immediate, like basically right before the filing deadline, to get the candidates removed from the ballot, all of a sudden, every single one of those like races that I stated previously had a candidate in them. Like literally every single one. And some of these ones, people were like, wait, like the House race had a candidate who the Green Party had previously denied ballot access to because they didn't agree with him. Like he was an anti-immigration activist. Sure enough, every single one of the candidates on the ballot was a Republican plant. However, there is one more vetting issue that it's policy-oriented. See, here's one of the big things about the Greens. Like I said, the Greens are basically for everybody who's like an anti-democratic party leftist. So that, of course, means there are some people who are in the conspiratorial sphere of left-wing politics. You know, the people who are like 5G towers are ruining us. You know, David Rold. But essentially, one of the biggest ones, which basically overlaps with this, what do you get when you have a bunch of conspiracy theorists? Almost immediately, it turns to Jews. And of course, the Green Party, unfortunately, has a little bit of an anti-Semitism problem. It's one of those things where it's like, and again, it's like, it's one of those things where people who will claim like, oh no, we're just talking about like the Israel-Palestine issue, but it's like, are you really? And like I discussed in my video where I talk about like people who like, it's not just like anti-Semitism point blank, but it's like people who are like letting anti-Semitism slide. Like, I mean, sure, there'll be some members who will just say that they believe that the Jews control the media, but then there are also other people who will say, well, actually, what they mean is they're trying to talk about the extreme amount of pressure that AIPAC seems to have on like media organizations. Like, no, that's not what they said. They didn't say that. They're literally posting pictures of random people in the movie industry with Stars of David Photoshop next to them. Like, they're not saying any of the things that you're saying. AIPAC has never left their mouth. They're saying a different four-letter word. First one I noticed was in the like unofficial, official Green Party Facebook group. You see, because that was the thing. Like, and I was a member of it for a while, but there was like a Green Party Facebook group that was like, it was supposed to be, it was technically unofficial, but it was like, essentially all the Greens were in there. All the major Green Party people were in there. And one day, out of the blue, a candidate by the name of Joe Manchin, yes, that is his name, Joe Manchin, he posted a thing where he claimed that literally every single Jewish member of Congress was an Israeli dual citizen. And the list was old because it included people like Russ Feingold on it. And that was what tipped me off. Like, I was like reading it. I was like, I mean, at first it just paid much attention. Like, oh yeah. But then it's like, wait, Bernie Sanders, Russ Feingold, Alan Grayson? Wait, these guys have been critical of Israel. Wait a second. And then I said, it was basically the equivalent of him posting like the Rothschilds conspiracy theory. And then he immediately posted a link saying like, but the Rothschilds are real. In their 2020 presidential election cycle, at least two of their presidential candidates were anti-Semitic. David Rold, who was very blatantly, openly, super anti-Semitic, and then Chad Wilson, which I didn't learn about until like long after the election was over, and it's like, wait, it's so blatant. He literally, I got like what Joe Manchin did, he essentially did that, but instead for Dario Hunter, claiming that he was a dual citizen of Israel, even though, again, no evidence of that being the case. And I mean, to a degree, you could also claim that of like a majority of the other Green Party members, because it's like one of the big things that was being stated that, like, one of the reasons that were like, oh, you shouldn't support Dario Hunter for president, and you should support Howie. Like, these were prominent members of the Howie campaign that were saying this. They were saying, like, oh, we shouldn't support Dario Hunter because Dario Hunter is a Zionist. And it's like, that's really weird. Like, I think they claim to have posted something. I don't remember. It's been a while because it's like, who cares? But it's like, that's weird. Like, that is weird in retrospect, thinking like, yeah, that's weird to accuse like the one Jewish candidate of being a Zionist. It's just weird. Like, I mean, it could be true. I don't know. Apparently there was like a think tank that Dario was a member of that like may have been Zionist, and it's like, I don't know. I don't remember. That was basically like they posted a video of them clicking a link, and then that link showed a picture of Dario there, and it's like, see? And it's like, I don't remember. It's weird. But anyways, we can't forget the biggest one of them all, Cynthia McKinney, who has done literally everything. She's done anti-Semitism, she's done Holocaust denial, she's done COVID denial, she's done election, like, she is like the weirdest one of them all. She is the one they really should have. She literally fits all the categories I mentioned before. She was a Democratic operative. She left the Democrats to join the Greens. She's a Republican operative because she supports basically everything Republican now. And she is an anti-Semite. Boy, she got the whole shebang. Though to be fair, in McKinney's case, they at the very least have like tried to cut her off. Like, they did this thing where it's like all the Green Party candidates are united together one more time. And it's like, I couldn't help but notice that you only have 4 people here. Jill Stein, David Cobb, Ralph Nader, and Howie Hawkins. Couldn't help but notice that there's someone missing. And I didn't expect it, but we're actually on the last thing already. And it's similar to how I talk about the other progressive groups. But the Greens may or may not have like a little bit of a wiggle room for this. But you'll see why they don't necessarily have it when I talk about it in a bit. They make really weird choices on where they want to run. Like, some of the places they run make total incomplete sense, but then there are other times they run where it's like, why are you running here? And then you start to think, like, what? Like, again, why do you choose to run here and not here? These guys claim they want to build some sort of like a big alternative to the Democrats. They want all the progressives to go to the they want to leave the Democrats, join the Greens, push for like this alternative to the two-party system. But they really don't necessarily plan ahead for that. Like, they really didn't have a huge plan to try and get the burners to join the Greens. They just expected it to happen. But they also didn't necessarily plan for like the ability to make an alternative to the Democratic Party. I'll use my home state of North Carolina as a prime example. After the 2016 election, the Green Party managed to get on the ballot. And that was big news. Like, they were officially on the ballot with the Libertarians. The Libertarians always consistently got that amount to get on the ballot. And now the Greens were on the ballot, and they just had to do something to remain on the ballot. And usually, what parties do to try and remain on the ballot is run as many candidates as they can. That way, the amount of votes counted towards them will count towards them being able to have amount of people staying. Like, if they have a certain amount of votes towards them, they can remain on the ballot, or they can gather petitions to remain on the ballot. Here's what the Greens decided to do. For the 2018 elections, the first elections ever since 2016, okay, this is the election that's supposed to get a bunch of burners to join the Greens, alright? So here's what they decided to do. For this election cycle, they decided to run a whopping, let's do the calculations. They decided to run one candidate in a partisan race. However, it turns out that was enough to keep them on the ballot for a little bit. And in 2019, they had 2 special elections that they could run candidates in. They decided to run one person. Alright. In 2020, they decided to do something a little different. They decided to run 2 candidates. Howie Hawkins and Tamara Zwinak. Wait, they didn't endorse Zwinak. So that's still one candidate. And unfortunately, Howie's results did not necessarily pan out the way they expected, and neither did Zwinak. So they didn't get support come the election, so they were booted off the ballot. What makes that race even more interesting is the fact that they didn't run in the Senate seat, or in any of the safe blue seats, or even in safe red seats. Okay, to be fair, maybe they didn't have the people to run in the safe red seats, which might lead to another problem that we'll have to look into. But the Greens did manage to circle enough petitions to get a candidate in this election cycle, Matthew Hoh, who is again going to be the only Green on the ballot in North Carolina. So again, they keep running like one candidate when they need to run multiple candidates. Like, the Constitution Party understands this. They've run, and the Libertarians understand this too. Libertarians run candidates in almost every seat they can, and the Constitution Party, they run in quite a few races. Like, I mean, they'll run in like a House seat, a state House seat, and the senatorship, and like the governorship. They're not necessarily able to do that now because they had similar problems with the Greens, but they're trying to push forth with a state House seat. But as you can see, the Greens seem to have this really weird problem of not being able to run in a lot of areas. And that could be, again, like a problem with the party, like maybe their members are stretched thin, but it's like, I know they have members. Why don't they just have like Robert Corriher just running many cycles, or Lauren Allen Smith running a lot of cycles, or Matthew Hoh? Why didn't he run in an earlier cycle? And the thing is, you can't necessarily use certain excuses for this. Like, for example, like you could say, oh, they didn't run in that last Senate seat because it was a very close seat. As opposed to North Carolina's very obvious swing to one party in the presidential race. And if that's the case, why not run a person in a safe seat? That way you can continue to grow the party, but also have like people run so we know that the party isn't just sitting around. And this is very common. Back in 2002, the Greens had an internal problem when they were running a candidate in the 2002 Minnesota Senate race, as that seat was held by Paul Wellstone, literally one of the furthest left Democrats at the time. And as I was doing research, because I was writing a video about that same race, it turns out the person that they were trying to run was literally worse than Wellstone. At least in the areas that they were claiming that Wellstone was not doing good in. They were claiming that Paul Wellstone wasn't as 100% anti-war as they were, but it turns out that the candidate they wanted to run, Ed McGaugh, was actually very much more hawkish in regards to war than Wellstone was. In New York, they had this guy called Edwin DeJesus run against a DSAer named Tiffany Caban. And the thing is, Tiffany Caban, like, she's one of the furthest left people in New York, like, at least in the Democrat side. And she was like a very high-profile race. I think she was in a high-profile race previously, but that didn't pan out. And that was why she was in a high-profile race that time around. But Edwin, he showed up, he ran, and he was trying to claim that she wasn't, like, as further left than he is, despite the fact that he literally pushed against vaccine mandates, and literally the day after his cycle, like the day after he lost, he said, "Let's go, Brandon," which is a conservative meme, and it's like, that's very weird that this far left guy is pushing a conservative meme. And in the 2022 cycle, they're running a candidate in the Pennsylvania Senate race, a race that again has a very high profile progressive from the Bernie cloth, again sort of snuffing the Bernie crowd from the Greens. The thing is, like, you could make the argument that, like, yeah, they're a political party. They're not like a political group. They have to run to actually remain on the ballot. The Working Families Party, they don't need to have people continually run to get them on the ballot because they'll just endorse the Democrat. Then that'll guarantee them ballot access. DSA doesn't have to worry about ballot access. They're a political group. They're not a party. But then you say, well then, why didn't they run in certain seats instead of running in these seats? Like, for example, like, you can't say, you can't run in that very close Senate race. North Carolina's Senate race is too close to count. We can't risk having the Republican win when we have another close Senate race in this cycle. Cherry Beasley is in a close Senate race, and I don't even think she's as egregious as Cunningham. In fact, the conservative in the cycle is probably more egregious than Tom Tillis. And in the Green, the California, like this California, the Greens ran one candidate against Michael Desaulniers. Michael Desaulniers is not a bad representative. He's not the best, but he's pretty good. And yet, apparently the Greens only ran a candidate against him. There was like no other candidate in the unity slate. Like none in a deep red area, none in a deep blue area. It didn't make any sense. And I think this sort of ties into the problem with the Greens. The Greens, at the end of the day, have to be the anti-Democrat left. They have to keep running against the Dems because it's very obvious that the Greens, they only do good in areas with Dems because like it's not like they're turning over Republicans. Republicans only use them when they need to astroturf. They're always going to be like in deep blue areas. They're always going to be in these seats because that's where the far left people live. And I mean, that's kind of the reason why I haven't supported a Green in like a decent bit. Like I've supported like Luis Rodriguez for the California governorship, but it's like that was like right after like a very contentious recall election. And Matthew Hull, the only reason I'm supporting him is because he's in my state and I can actually vote for him. And Jerry Beasley's awful. Like I mean, if he were in literally any other seat and any of these same circumstances, I wouldn't really care. The Greens aren't really making themselves well known. If the Greens are being overtaken by Movement for People's Party, and Movement for People's Party is just so bad. I mean, I hate to say it, but like maybe it is true that the Greens won't be around for the 2024 cycle because I don't think they're going to survive it. Whatever happens next, I think things are going to be changing in the 2024 cycle. We're going to be seeing a new face when it comes to the third party sphere. I just don't know who it is yet. So anyways, that's all I gotta say. I hope the Green Party isn't too mad that I roasted them, but that is how it is. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell to notify when a future video comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, check out my articles on the Independent Political Report, or consider supporting me on Patreon.